Greetings and welcome once again to Beverly's Times Past. My name is Ed Josephs, and once again we have as our guest this evening Richard W. Symmes from North Beverly, author and editor of the marvelous book North Beverly Remembered. Rich, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Ed.
And we're going to tonight show some pictures of some of the people who lived in the North Beverly area going way back as far as the 1800s, late 1800s, and bring us right along to about the year of 1955 or so. And we might talk a bit about people living in a neighborhood. One of the things that comes to my mind when we visit a neighborhood, we can see the landmarks and we can see the old houses and what have you, but the people are short-lived, so to speak. They come and they go. 50 years maybe if they're around that long, but certainly they go and they leave behind little bits and pieces of who they were.
That's correct, and I think, especially looking at the gravestones up in the cemetery, you see names that have been in the North Beverly area for years and years and years. And I would think that perhaps until the last 25 years or so, people would stay in a neighborhood like North Beverly, and generations would grow up there. But today it's not so much like that. You have people that use North Beverly as a bedroom community. And they may be here a few years and then they move on. The job changes, they get transferred, and they're gone. So you don't have the generation following generation of the same families, and that's probably true everywhere, not just North Beverly.
Yeah. You and I are just old enough to remember the pre-Route 128 days, and some of our viewers out there, I'm sure, who are in their later 60s and 70s and beyond, remember the old days where it was a real rural area up there in North Beverly.
That's right.
And of course, on the other hand, the people who are younger have just the memories of how it is today in the past few years that have gone by. Well, Rich, let's talk about some people. First picture we have in front of us is dated 1883.
And it's the Dodge farm, which stood at 200 Dodge Street, or Dodge's Row, and we can get into the difference between those two in a while. But in any event, this farm stood up there for years. The picture was taken, as you say, in 1883. The farm stood until 1928, September 14th to be exact, when it was consumed by fire. A rather spectacular fire caused by lightning, and we covered this in the book. The interesting part of it was that the barn was struck and apparently did not ignite immediately. It smoldered overnight and caught fire the following day. And then in a high wind, the entire barn and house and everything went up, and it was not rebuilt. There's a small ranch house there today.
As we see now in the picture, this ranch is now on the site of the original
That's
house.
right. Probably sits closer to the road. I think the original house probably sat further back in there. But all the land down and back was all farmland at that time, because it's all house lots today.
Yeah, this lovely picture was given to the Society by Hazel Robertson, I believe.
Along with quite a few others that were in the book.
Yep. Well, our next picture that we will now look at, the Dodge's Row School, as it has burned.
Well, actually, we have sort of a before and after view here. We have a picture of John Wales and George Foster sitting in the schoolroom. It was a one-room schoolhouse, and it's decorated for some sort of a fair, perhaps Christmas or whatever, we don't know. But in any event, the companion picture shows another interior view after the fire, and the fire was on October 5th, 1905. And this is the building that we talked about before, that the structure was fairly sound after the fire, fairly well intact, and a lot of the timber was rumored to have been used in the construction of a nearby home, which still stands today. And we were told this when we were doing the book, and it wasn't really proven until quite recently, when somebody came forward and said that they indeed lived in the house, and you could still go down in the basement and look up and see some of the scorched beams used to create the first floor of the building.
This would be at number 280?
That's 280 Dodge Street, which
yeah.
is just about, maybe 3 or 4 house lots up the road from where the school originally sat.
Let's talk about Dodge Street versus Dodge's Row here.
Mm-hmm.
How would you define?
Well, Dodge Street, of course, comes up from down at Foster's Corner, where Henry's Market is. That's where it actually begins, and it's Route 1A. And when you get as far as the crossing at North Beverly, the railroad crossing, where Enon Street takes off to the left, then Dodge Street theoretically ends, and Dodge's Row begins on the other side of the tracks going up toward Wenham. In fact, there's even a sign on the Wenham end that says Dodge's Row.
But the numbers run consecutively from low
That's correct.
to high without a break there.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Dodge's Row. Now, next picture, number 3. We're over at the Bass River School, about 1909, Rich.
Mm-hmm. And we have a picture of one of the classes. We thought we'd bring a few pictures of these school kids, because we had a lot of those donated during the book project. This one, unfortunately, does not have too many people identified in it. There's probably about 25 kids here, and out of those, there are only 4 or 5 identified. And the ones who are in the front row from left to right: Pauline Teague, and then there's a little girl we don't know, and then Frances Millett, Ursula Millett, and another one we don't know, and then the fourth from the left in the second row, rather, is Doris Mead. And other than that, we really don't know who the people are. Charles Brown is standing on the background there on the right side, and he was the principal up there. But other than that, we really don't know who these people are.
Yeah. So we could use some help here, viewers, if you happen to know of any of these people, who they are. Why, Rich and the Historical Society would be happy to receive the information.
We'd always love to fill in some of these blanks, absolutely.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about Mr. Brown, as you might know.
Well, he was the principal there for many years, and of course that's why the Bass River School was later named the Brown School after him. I don't know exactly how many years he was principal, but I know it was a good many.
Yeah.
And he certainly appears in a lot of these children's class pictures that have surfaced.
Quite a nice man, as I've heard and read about him.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, and this picture comes to us from Pauline Teague Glidden, we might add, and the preceding one of the Dodgers Row Schools was donated by Nils Askman, I
That's
believe
correct.
the fellow's name was.
That's correct.
Okay, next picture. We have a North Beverly baseball team. This one's dated about 1908, Rich.
That's right, and there were a couple of shots. We'll have another one coming up of these baseball players. And again, I really don't know who they are. They're way before my day. But we could identify some of them, and this is 1908, and in the front row from left to right are Bert Wallace, and then someone whose first name we don't know, but his last name was Baker, then Earl Lovett, Ted Cann, Harry Perkins, and Billy Orcutt. That's O-R-C-U-T-T, if anybody wants to know the spelling. The second row is Bunny Mason. Bunny certainly must have been a nickname. Someone's first name we don't know, but their last name was Day. Bert Manny, or Manay, it's M-A-N-A-Y. And then the third row, W.C. someone or other, we don't know the last name, Earl Wallace. And the back row, Ned Millett and Guy Drugan.
They don't smile, do they?
Well, picture taking was a serious business back in 1908. You didn't have snapshot cameras and everybody running around shooting pictures like they do today, where you don't give it a second thought. It was pretty serious stuff. You had to line up and
Yeah.
Someone had to take an exposure that might have lasted 8 or 10 seconds, and you had to be real formal and stilted, and that's why they look like that.
We might also add that these neighborhood teams were quite popular back around the turn of the century and well into this century, whereas the Ryle Siders would be challenging the North Beverly teams, or Centerville, Beverly Cove, and so on. There was a fierce rivalry of athletic competition that went on during those years that we don't see today.
That's correct.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And just by looking at the uniforms, you know that they took it seriously, getting all decked out like that.
Sure did.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, and I believe they may have played some teams across the border in Wenham, perhaps to Wenham. I know they had a ball club at that time.
Quite likely, sure.
Well, let's go to the next one, which, again, we think is a continuation of the preceding picture.
Yes, and this one, unfortunately, there was no identification on the original print, but the same men, it's quite likely, or at least some of them are in the picture from the one we just looked at. And supposedly they won the championship that year in the local competition. It says pennant winners, 1908.
Indeed.
And the scoreboard in the background says North Beverly and opponents, so we don't know who the opponents were. But
indeed. The only way we might know it's not of the same year, the hats are different.
The caps are different. They seem to be a little more professional. They have the stripes and the whole business.
Yeah, I would say this might be a little later on than the preceding one. But
yeah, it might be a year later,
sure.
perhaps.
Yeah. Well, now we come to a wonderful snapshot, and this is the Bass River School, grades 7 and 8, dated probably around 1911 and 1912, somewhere in that area. Contributed by Gladys T. Symmes.
Yeah, that was my mother, and she's in the picture. And again, Charles Brown is quite prominent over there on the right side. And this, of course, is the old school, the one that was there before the present one that is today, the condominiums.
Okay.
And most of the people in this picture were identified.
Okay. Why don't you read the front row names, and I'll take the next one.
Okay, the front row, left to right. Bill Teague, Harold Kidder, someone, first name we don't know, Roberts, and Melvin Danforth.
Okay. Now the girls sitting in the next row, we have Carrie Sawyer, Helen Hitchings, Mildred Parker, Helen Wilkins, Constance Murphy, Marjorie Nutter, and Marion Stanley.
Okay, and the next row, standing, Everett Danforth, Agnes Colby, Miss Wallace, who apparently was the teacher, Helen Brown, someone we don't know, Gladys Trask, who was my mother, who became Gladys Symmes, Myrtle Mead, Annie Corning, Leverett Jennis, Ruth Hoff, Hazel Parker, and Ray Millett.
And in the last row, at the top, the first person is not identified. We then have Dorothy Cann, Olive Caldwell, Winthrop Porter, Grace Barter, Richard Wilkins, not identified, the next person, Gladys Keene, Philip Rowe, Leah Perkins, Doris Conant, and the principal, Charles S. Brown. Some of those names are familiar. Of course, anytime you see a Conant name, you have to know that that's a local name that needs no explanation. But I was looking through the list here, and let's see, Caldwell name, that might have been connected.
That's connected to the greenhouses.
The greenhouse, and maybe the Barter girl might have been
one of the Barters down on Cabot Street.
Charles Barter family, etc. Yeah, we really, Rich and I are just young enough not to know too many of these people.
That's right. A few of them are still alive. I know that to be a fact. But of course, some of these, the girls in particular, those were names that aren't familiar because they've all since married, and so you wouldn't really know anyway.
Yeah. Now, your mother's name was Trask, and you were telling me that she is not related to the local Trask family?
No, her father was from Farmington, New Hampshire. So that's the Trasks up in that area.
I see. So your dad traveled north to...
Well, no,
picked up his
she
bride?
lived here in Beverly. Her mother came from Beverly, and the family separated, and they lived here, and her father lived in Farmington and died quite young.
Yeah. Okay. Next picture. We have the Quirk, Q-U-I-R-K, Quirk family house. There's no date to this, but we can assume it's rather old, around the turn of the century.
I would say by looks of the costumes.
And carry on, Rich.
Well, this house still stands today. It's at the intersection of Budley Avenue and Laurel Avenue. And Minnie Quirk, who was lived there for many years, was well known at Second Congregational Church. She was a member of that church for many, many years. And even I can remember her when I was younger. And apparently this is some sort of family gathering. We really don't know that much about it. The picture came from the Ruth Stanley collection. I guess the Stanleys had something to do with that family as well. But that's about all I can tell you about that one.
And that Stanley name is S-T-A-N-D-L-E-Y.
D-L-E-Y, correct.
Okay. Well, we go next to Austin Cressy, standing on Dodge Street in the front of a rather distinguished house, Rich.
Yeah, that's the Peter Woodbury house, and that stands right on the corner of Frankwood Avenue where I live. And that's one of the older houses in Beverly. I believe that dates to about